This is an interview with Alan Zimm for the Virginia Holocaust Museum. The date is January 27th, 2013. My name is Timothy Hensley and our videographer is Lindsay Stone. Can you start by telling us your full name?
My name is Alan Zimm, but my name before was different.
Okay, what was it?
Alan Ziemniak, Alex, but was hard to pronounce. When we came here, we knew a Dr. Kupfer. He was also from Poland, but he was here many years earlier. So he said, don't use that name. Cut it off, make it Z-I-M-M.
Can you tell us where you were born?
I was born in Poland, Kolo, K-O-L-O. Means, in Polish means a wheel. The reason is the city was surrounded by a river all the way around. So that's why they named it Kolo. And when my family, we had a large family. We were 6 brothers and 3 sisters. And my parents, and some of my grandparents. So when the war started, the Germans came in, invaded Poland. The day before they started the war, they bombed our city, the railroad station, because our city was a railroad junction going to do different direction. So they bombed the railroad station and they killed about 200 people there. There were evacuees on a train and they killed all 200 of them. And I was, my older brother, me, he was 2 years older, were in the street, and the Polish army took us up to the station to help them clear out. That scene I'd never forget. It was terrible. It was dismembered bodies, all, and so we were working there for a couple of hours. And then my brother and I said, let's go home. And when the soldiers were on the other side, we ran away back home.
Well, let me back you up just a little bit. Can you tell me when you were born, the date?
May 24, 1920.
Okay. And you said you had 6 brothers and
3 sisters.
And 3 sisters. What were the age ranges?
Well, it was 2 brothers younger than me, and the sister was younger, 1. And the rest of them were older. My oldest brother was he escaped to the East Poland, but they killed him there, the Germans.
Can you tell us their names, like in the order in which they...
Hillard, Salomon, Rivka, Luba, Abraham, and Alex, and then Yossi, and what's the name? Yossi and Raphael, and the girl's name was, what's his name? Luban. Fella. That was the youngest one.
And what were your parents' names?
Menachem was my father, and Shaina was my mother.
And what did your father do for a living?
He was a trader in cattle. He was buying cattle from the farmers and selling it to the butchers.
And can you tell us just a little bit about what life was like before the war started?
Yeah, well, I went to school and I was graduated from public school. Then for 3 years I went to trade school. In Poland you have to have a trade school. And there I learned how to design things, how to sew, and that's why I was there 3 years. And finished up that. Then my oldest brother has his own shop. He was also a tailor. So I worked with him until the Germans came in.
And which brother was this?
The oldest one, Hiller.
Hiller, okay. And was your family particularly religious?
No, I would say conservative.
Okay. Do you remember?
They were not Orthodox.
Okay. Do you remember any instances of anti-Semitism before the war started?
Yeah, but my friends and I have Christian friends that were very nice to me. We didn't know anything about anti-Semitism there. Maybe in other places was more. But he was very close to me. I was, his name was Caesar. And he had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And the parents when the Germans came in, his older brother was a truck driver for the Germans. They requested him, and he was driving trucks for the Germans. So what happened is, in June of 1929 was the war. In June 1941, exactly, the Germans were meticulous by planning everything. They had everything planned out already. The day they came into our town, they executed 5 Poles in the middle of the square. People asked them why they executed them. They found guns in their homes. They were soldiers. They were demobilized and took the guns home with them. So they hanged them or killed them, executed them. So this was very shocking to me, this story. So after a while, we were doing forced labor. The Germans made you to work. If you didn't work, you didn't get a ration card. If you didn't have a ration card, you couldn't buy food. So you had to. I was working for the Germans.
And how soon after the invasion did that start for you?
Right away, about 6 months later, we had to work, because some bridges were blown up, highways. So we had to go rebuild the bridges. They built right away a new bridge, the Germans. It took them 2 months to build a bridge, not concrete, but from wood. So the army could move through back and forth. And when they came in, it was very scary. It was very scary. The black uniforms, the Gestapo and the SS, they were very scary looking people. I mean, people were afraid of them. Look at them. You couldn't look at the Nazi. If they notice you looking at them, they kill you. Because they're afraid, in case they lose the war, people recognize them.
Now, in that time period when they had first invaded and you were starting to have to work as...
In the town, because the town was surrounded by water, so they have many bridges. So we had to work on the bridges. So that's what I was working at.
But you were still living at home?
Yes.
Was your entire family having to work, or just...
No, everybody has to work. My brothers too.
Yeah. What about your sisters?
Huh?
What about your sisters?
Well, my sisters stayed home. They didn't work. They were the 2 older sisters, and the youngest one was just 10 years old at that time. So when the Germans started to do that, so a lot of people, my brothers, 2 of them, escaped the eastern part of Poland, because Poland was divided among the Russians and the Germans. The Russians invaded eastern Poland. They made an agreement with Germany to divide Poland. So the Polish army had no chance. So surrounded from both sides.
And so that was 2 of your brothers escaped?
Yeah, in the eastern part. But they still didn't survive, because when the Germans attacked Russia, they got all of them there.
So can you tell me about your experiences in the town after the Nazis invaded?
Well, that I'm saying, I was working forced labor every day for 10 hours. And if you had the ID card, everybody had to make an ID, a different ID, in German, everything. So, in this picture. So they checked your ID. If you worked, you had a stamp, stamped it. And if you didn't work, there was no stamp there. So they wouldn't give you a ration card to buy food. They paid you for the work, but very little. So it was enough to pay for the groceries.
And how long were you able to stay in your hometown?
We stayed in there until 1941, June 1941. Before that, about 6 months before that, they took out from our town about 1,000 people, Jewish people, and settled them in a village not far from our town. So they took the Poles from that village and sent them to Germany to work. And the village, the whole villages were empty. So they took from our town 1,000 people, put them in the village. And one of them was my father and mother. They put them there. But I didn't go. I was working in town. And what I'm saying about that other guy, the friend, Caesar, when the war broke out, his brother was driving a truck. So June 21, 1941, when the Germans invaded Russia, they started war against Russia. The same day, the same night, they started killing Jews. They had everything meticulously planned. So what they did, they took him out into, not far from our town, but 10 miles, was an old palace, but empty, was nobody lived there. So they took the people there to the palace and they killed them all. And then the chauffeur, his older brother, was a witness. He saw it, what they were doing. So the Germans told him, if you're going to reveal anything what you've seen here, you're going to be, when your family is going to be here too, be dead. So he was very scared. When he came home, he told his parents that, what he saw. But he swore to the palace, to the parents, he crossed himself, do not say to anything, anybody, because we all going to be killed. But he was such a good friend of mine. He told me what the Germans were doing. Because until then, nobody believed them. Nobody thought they were going to do that. Because the Germans were very shrewd. They planned everything. When they came to town and talked to people, so my parents lived already in a village, so they told the rest of the people, they came with trucks and shipped them on a train and said, you go into the farms where the Poles left, and you're going to work on a farm. So everybody believed them. They didn't go on a farm. They took them out there and killed them. At that time, the Germans had already built 2 trucks, hermetically closed. In the trucks, with 2 pipes from the floor, were putting carbon monoxide. So they put the people in the truck, and by the time they got to the woods, they were dead already. So that's what happened then. So my friend said, when the Germans tell you to come, line up. You go into a village, don't go. And I never went. I always ran away from one place to another, was hiding out. So my mother had a sister living in another district, in the Lodz district. And we lived in Poznan district. So that district, they started to kill all the people first. And the other districts, they didn't know anything, what's going on. When I escaped to my aunt, the name was, town was Varta. And her husband, my uncle, was a watchmaker and jewelry. He was an expert watchmaker. He had a son with 12 years old. He knew already how to work on watches. But the Germans, the Gestapo, hired him to do all the watches for them, all the clocks. So he was protected by the Nazis. And when I arrived there and told him what they were doing, he couldn't believe it. How could they do something like that? But they're doing it. So at that time he didn't believe in it. But later on, when they finished that state, they came there and started to take these people all to be killed. What they did, they took a group with my uncle together of 200 men and women with the families and shipped them to the ghetto in Lodz, to the Lodz ghetto.
Do you remember about what date?
Huh?
Do you remember the date?
I don't.
Okay.
But I remember we arrived in the Lodz ghetto in 1942, somewhere in July of 1942. And you know, you got to be lucky. Everywhere you go, you got to have faith and luck. So when I arrived in the Lodz ghetto, the ghetto was run like a country. So their own police, labor department, everything set up. The Germans set it up like that. And the police were in uniforms, Jewish police. So we signed up, you have to register there. And they put us into an empty school called the Rothschild School. And we were in that school. And they set up a table there and registered everybody. And the guy who registered was my older sister, best friend. So he said, was shocked. He asked me, where's your sister? So I told her, I don't know, she's somewhere else. We didn't see her. We couldn't see her anymore because they killed him. But I didn't tell him that. I didn't know what was happening. So he said, where do you want to work? I said, I want to go to a factory. We're making clothes. He said, well, you crazy? Go to a place where there's food. So he assigned me to a distribution of food. A big square where the Germans put in cabbages, potatoes, all the vegetables for the ghetto. So I was there by the distribution. They had a kitchen there, set up a kitchen, cooked meals, soups and everything. So we ate there. And I took home one of my sisters was with me in the ghetto. They took her also. And I took home for her food so she could have enough food. And then when they took my uncle and his wife to the Lodz ghetto too. So they were staying with us together, all of them. What was happening is, then when the Germans came into the ghetto and took out people from the ghetto and take them away, they tell them also the same story, which wasn't true. So the first time in German history there, they brought back my uncle to fix their watches. And they didn't kept him back from the camp. And they brought him back. And then at the time, I stayed there about 8 months in the ghetto.
Okay.
I got to know the head of the ghetto, Mr. Rumkowski, and another thing happened. He said to us on the vegetable plate, he needs for breakfast every day green onions or radishes. So I was picking up the green onions and the radishes and walked to his place. It was about 12 blocks or more. He lived in a villa. He took over a villa. And in the front of the villa were 4 policemen guarding the villa, but he was there. So when I arrived with the vegetables, they let me go in straight to the house. And he had 2 maids, one a cook and one taking care of the house. So the woman who took care of the house looked at me and said, wait a minute, aren't you Rivka's brother, my older sister? Yes, she was her best friend, my older sister. So wherever you are, faith and luck is with you. So when I took the vegetables there, she always gave me back other stuff. She had meat, all kinds of things. In Rumkowski's house was a vat with water. Like in the water was a live fish was swimming. But everybody was starving in the ghetto. People didn't have any food. But I looked very well. I mean, I gained weight. So the people who came with me, and they didn't work in the food, they looked at me, what is the matter with you? You got swollen. I was eating a lot. Well, see, it's hunger. Everybody's hungry, so you like to eat more. So we stayed in the ghetto about 1 year, a whole year. In the middle of the night, they came to my house, the police with the German Gestapo, and took only the people working with food. So they were physically strong, and put us on a train. We were 1,000 of us. And we figured maybe we're going to, at that time we already knew the Auschwitz existed. They built Auschwitz because the Germans figured the place where they killed all the people there didn't do an efficient job, not many enough. So in Auschwitz they could kill more people every day. They killed 10,000 people a week there in Auschwitz. So when we are on the train going away from the Lodz ghetto. So I looked through the window, but the window was a closed-in train. You couldn't get out or nothing. But there were little windows. So we looked through the window and I looked at the names of the train stations, because I knew Polish geography very well, the Polish map and all that. So I looked through the window and wanted to know which way we're going. If you go to the right, you're going to Auschwitz. If you're going to the left, you're going somewhere else. So the train stopped in a station, and the train moved to the left. I said to the guys, We're not going to Auschwitz, we're going somewhere else. So we arrived to another place called Częstochowa, a Polish city. And in that city were 4 labor camps all around the city. But the Germans had set up 2 factories there. They're called the Hasag, military, built all parts for the military, bayonets, not guns, and belts, shoes, helmets, everything for the army, uniforms. So they let the people stay there and do the work. So after I stayed a year, in the middle, like I said before, the middle of the night, they showed up to my house and took me out and left my sister and aunt back.
So your sister and aunt had gone...
They were behind in the ghetto still. The ghetto was still on. So, like I said, I arrived in Częstochowa and they put us into a camp there. Also, there were other people already there before us. They were from Krakow, from other places. And I said to them, what are you doing here? He said, we work in a factory. So every day in the morning they assigned you to work in a factory. So we worked there for about a year in that factory.
Do you remember what you were doing?
Huh?
Do you remember what kind of work you were doing?
Well, I was lucky. I didn't go to inside the factory. But inside the factory, he worked at a machine. I didn't have no food. But they assigned me to work in a train station to help unload the people.
Hang on just one second.
I'm gonna pause. I was worried. Okay, I'm rolling again.
Okay, so you were talking about arriving at Częstochowa.
Yeah, I worked. The factories, the ammunition factories were called Hasag. Hasag 1, Hasag 2. There were 2 factories there. The Germans employed all prisoners there. And we worked there for about a year.
And you were actually working at a train station then?
And training, but I was there for a year. Every night you had to go back home. In the mornings when it took you to the train station, we clean up the trains, everything, people coming out, they line them up, and everybody had a number coming out. They were very meticulous, the German. Everything had to work like a clock.
Do you remember if there were mostly Jews in...
Only Jews.
Only Jews?
Yeah. And there were guards, Polish guards there too. They mobilized Poles to guard us. They were in Polish police, were there. In Poland, the Germans set up Central Poland and Eastern Poland, a protectorate. And all they had police there, the Poles ruling there, not the Germans, the Poles. And so the police were guarding us also, plus the Germans. They didn't trust the Poles 100%.
Did you meet anybody there that...
Yes, I made 2 friends from Krakow. We stayed together all the time. So in the middle of the night, they came again and woke us up and took us away in a train station, all on the train. And we didn't know where we were going.
And this would have been about 1943?
44.
44, okay.
And beginning of 44.
Okay.
Like in January or something like that. And we were in the train for 3 days and 3 nights. And the train came, we went to Germany, to central Germany. And we arrived in a hilly area, mountains all over. The train was going around and around and around and finally stopped. When it stopped, made everybody get out. In the camp, there's a square, like a marketplace, and lined everybody up in the square. All 1,000 of us, and 200, each 100. And the Gestapo came in, with dogs and whips, and they picked everybody for different areas to go. I didn't know what I was doing. So they asked me what you can do. I said, I'm a tailor, I can learn sew. They didn't send you to a tailor shop. So then I signed us to a factory. We were there for 3 days. And we didn't know it was a factory there. Everything was camouflage. It was artificial trees. It was only 2 blocks away. And we didn't know it was a factory there. There are 35,000 prisoners working in that factory. So when I was assigned to a machine, I never saw the machine before, but the engineer, a German engineer, who was very nice, he trained me for a whole day what to do with the machine, how to operate the machine. So I was making a part to the rocket with V2 and V1. I was making the part to the V2. It was called a Dieselkörper, and you have to do 10 operations to finish that part. And you put it down on a table, like stuck him up on the table. You said, you're under your shift. You have to make 20 of these, and not defective. Because if you find 4 of them, which are damaged or defective, that's considered sabotage. And for that, they hang people. And they were hanging people there every day in that camp. So I was afraid to have some, they're going to hang me. So instead of 20, I made 25. So I figured, well, if 4 of them be bad, I still have 20 good ones. So the engineer was very happy with me. All 25 were okay. So he was so nice. He knew that we didn't have enough food to eat, very little. So feed you in the camp there, 6 o'clock in the morning. So woke you up. What do they give you? A piece of black bread, like that, in a piece of chewed tobacco, in a turnip soup, a bowl of turnip soup. You couldn't survive on that. So I went to work. A lot of people died from starvation there. So I told the engineer, we don't have an essen. It means eating, German. He said, don't worry, I'll take care of that. And every day in the morning, he would bring a sandwich and hiding in my machine, in my drawer of my machine. And I was picking it out and putting it on my shirt, because none of my friends, the co-workers would know that he brings to me food. They knock you over the head and take it away from you. So I kept it in my shirt. And when I went home, on my home, to the barracks, I went to sleep under the blanket I was eating, because I didn't want the next day to know either. So that way I could survive there. And I was there from January to April, working there. And then at that time already, the war moved into Germany. The Allies were moving from the west, and Russia was moving from the east. So the Germans then realized they lost the war. So they started to dismantle the factory, putting dynamite all over. We saw heavy boxes of dynamite they're putting in the Gestapo. I said to my engineer, I think this is going to be the end of us. He said, 999, there's waiting a train outside for you. You're not going to be on that group. It would blow up. At that time I was skeptical to believe him. You don't trust anybody, even though he was a nice man. He was nice, because of him I survived. So they took us out from there, the Nazis, and put us in, he told me it was true. They put us on a train, and put us on the train there. It was April the 1st of 1945. We were on the train for 3 days and 3 nights. Keep on going, north toward northern part of Germany. And then we arrived in a place called Bergen, a small town. The train stopped there, make us get out, everybody. And with the guards with dogs chasing us to start. We walked about 1.5 miles to an empty camp, military camp. The militaries were taken out, and they put us in that camp. And not far from that camp was another camp called Bergen-Belsen. Mostly were the women in that other camp. But they named this one Belsen the same, Belsen number 2. So we stayed there. We didn't have any food either. There were Russian prisoners, all kinds of prisoners, Frenchmen. Only about 200 were Jewish, the rest of them were non-Jewish. All of them, from Holland, Denmark. There were Germans there, real Germans, prisoners. They were against Hitler. You could identify them. They were wearing a red triangle with a G in there, Germany. And if somebody was a criminal, he was wearing a green. The green Germans were criminals there. They were controlling the whole camp, those criminals. So we stayed there and we didn't have any food either. So the British came back saying, the ships are on the way with food, the ships. It would take them 2 weeks to get here. By that time, everybody's going to be dead. So there were about 5,000 Russian prisoners there, military, soldiers, officers. They said to the English, you have to give us food. If you don't have food, we're going to take it. Around this camp, there are German villages. They have food. We go in there and get it. They didn't pay attention to the English. They worked out from the camp. And one day later, they brought in cows, sheep, goats, and food. Everything you could find that they have already. Set it up and everybody got food from them. Just had to make big fires, cook the meat, set bacon, everything there. I still remember like today. Because of that, we are still living. We survived. So we stayed there till April the 13th. And the 14th of April, the British was already there, but the Germans told us before, which was in the camp, before the liberation, they told us, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you have to line up in front of the barracks. We have to count you, because the Swiss Red Cross is coming to take you over. They lied to the last minute. It's at 9 o'clock the following day in the morning. The camp, about 2 blocks down, was the main gate to the camp. At 9 o'clock, the gate opened up. And who came in? A jeep with 4 military police, English, dressed up with red hats, white belts and hoses with guns. I said, are these people in a war? He dressed up like that. And behind them was a truck with military, soldiers. They jumped out from the truck, disarmed all the Germans, and put them in an enclosure because they were afraid the prisoners were going to kill them. But they got in there and killed a lot of them, the guards. And we stayed there until the war was over. May the 8th, the war was over. So we trying to go back to Poland to meet if anybody survived in my family. But he couldn't go, because at that time was the conference in Potsdam. Potsdam is right near Berlin, and to go to Poland, you have to go through there, and everything was blocked off. You couldn't move anywhere to go home or anything. So after 2 weeks, the conference was over. Roosevelt was there, Stalin, de Gaulle, and Churchill, all the 4 leaders. So after the conference was over, everybody left. So then they opened up the road to go back. So it took me a week to go back because a lot of bridges were destroyed, trains were not moving, so we were to walk from one place to another. And finally, we arrived in Poland, in the western part of Poland. So I wanted to go back to my hometown. At that time, I knew that there were Poles was no good, was working with the Nazis. They were killing Jews, were coming back from the war, liberated people. They were going into their homes, and when they go to home, the Poles were living already there. They killed those people. So I was afraid to go back to my hometown even. But I made sure I'm going there just for one day. And I arrived there in the evening when it was dark. I went to this guy, Caesar's home. He was there with his family. And he saw me. He looked up to the sky and crossed himself. He thought I'd come from heaven. I didn't survive. So I told him who I survived. He said, it's nothing you can see. I wanted to go to the place where they killed the people. They moved everything away. You couldn't find anything left there. So I went back from him. I went there for one day, went back to Poland, to Lodz, the big city, the second largest city. Because in Lodz, they survivors congregated there and they registered their names. And I went there, put my name on there too, and what town I was in, and when I came. And the whole room was a big room with all the names of the survivors coming back from Russia, from Germany, from everywhere. And everybody puts up his name. I looked at the names, and I noticed the name of a woman which was very known to me. I said, I would like to see her. So they told me, go by bus. It takes you about 15 minutes. You'll be there. There's a camp set up for the people, survivors coming back. And they were guarded by the Americans, everything. That was the American zone already. So I went back, I looked around, and that name was listed on the wall, was named the barrack, which barrack she is in, and I can go look for her. So when I arrived there and I looked for her, finally I found her. She looked at me, she said, my God, are you Rivka's brother? I said, yes. My older sister was her best friend. So we stayed there for a while, well, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And after that, I was anxious to go back to Poland to see if my family survived. And I arrived in Poland, in Lodz, I could say. And there where I met my wife, in Lodz. She worked in a delicatessen store in the city. And the people who owned the delicatessen store, I knew them from the Lodz ghetto. I worked under them in the ghetto. So when they saw me, they were very enthusiastic. So that's where I met my wife there. I stayed in Poland for about 2 months and went back to Germany. When I went back to Germany, I didn't go to the western part of Germany. I stayed in Berlin. We arrived in Berlin and I checked into a family's house at the time. The joint, the Joint Distribution Committee, they assigned you. If you arrived, they assigned you to homes. And I was assigned to a certain house, to an apartment. In that apartment lived a couple. She was Jewish and he was German. She survived the war. She had one son, same age. Rudy was his name. And we became very close friends. So I said to him, but that time, see, already before I went to Poland, he said, why are you going back to Poland? It's such a terrible place there. I said, I want to see if any of my family survived. And nobody survived. And when I was in Lodz, and met my wife, I said, I have to go back to Germany. The Poland is a bad place to be at that time. They were terrible, the Poles. They were worse than the Germans, some of them. Some of them were nice. Not all of them were like that. My friend, his family were very nice. So I stayed there and I met my wife, yeah? So we stayed there for about 3 months. I stayed there and came back to Germany, to Berlin. At that time, the Russians took over western part of Poland, and they trying to close the border. You couldn't be able to go back or forth. So I went back to Poland to get my wife back. I wasn't married then. To get her out of Poland. And she had 2 sisters. The older sister was there, and the other sister was in Germany. She was a work detail. They all survived as Christians, non-Jews. All 3 sisters. So I went back and I told them, listen, if you don't leave now, you won't be able to get out because they're going to close the border in 2 weeks. So they decided to go. And I took them out, all 3 of them, with me to Germany, to Berlin. And outside Berlin, was the western part of Berlin, was a big camp, a refugee camp, the IRA camp. And I took them there, and they registered there, in that camp, in Schlachtensee was called the camp. They stayed there, and then they wanted to go to western part of Germany because they wanted to go to the United States. From Berlin you couldn't go, nowhere. So we left, registered to leave with an American plane. We went to West Germany, to Munich, München. And Munich had a big camp already from survivors, all of them. And my wife and her sisters, I had an aunt living in New York. I mean, here in New York State. So she found out that they are living there, and she knew the address. So the Red Cross was there. She gave him the name, the address of the aunt in New York. The Red Cross contacted the American families. They found out that the 3 nieces survived. They're in Germany. So they sent papers for them to come to America. So the 2 sisters didn't want to go to the United States because one aunt lived in Toronto, Canada. She wants to go to the aunt. And my uncle, from my side, lived in New York. So my wife and I stayed in New York. The 2 sisters went to Canada, Toronto, Canada. They stayed there for a while. So I stayed there and went back to West Germany in Munich. We stayed there and we registered to go to America. And that time was so hard to get here. Even as papers, the aunt from Canada and my uncle guaranteed for me a job in America. So finally they decided to let us come. So they sent us the visas. And before we went to the visa, they took everybody, checked their health. Everybody. They made x-rays, chest x-rays, if you don't have any diseases. So I was okay, everything. So finally, we got the papers to go to America. When we arrived here, we were on a boat, the ship. We were 10 days on the ship till we arrived in New York. When we arrived in New York, it was a strange world. I mean, it was overwhelming to see the skyscrapers, everything. And everything was organized. So everybody has a shield with a name and date where you were born and everything. You had it on your neck. They took us off from the boat and put us in the camp there. From there, we were assigned to, at the time already, I forgot to tell you something. We got married in Germany. We lived with my oldest brother. He survived, but I didn't know that he survived. So when I was in Munich, a couple guys from my whole town came back also and registered. So I met them. He said, "Did you see your brother?" I said, "Which brother?" He said, "Solomon." "Where did you see him?" He said, "I saw him somewhere in the French zone." "You don't know where?" "No, he didn't." So I went to see him. He said, "Somewhere near the Swiss border." I went to see him there, and we arrived. I was very emotional. And I came back to Munich with him too, all together. And my wife was there already. And there was a small town where my oldest brother lived. He wanted to go back there. He didn't want to stay in camp. So we went back with him. In a small town. He lived outside. There was no camp. With a family. It's called Salgau in Germany. We went there. We registered there. There was a small group of survivors there, community, small group, maybe 20. And they had a community set up. So we met them every day, and then we decided to get married there. So there was no rabbi in the whole area there. We had to go to another town called Ulm. And from there was a larger Jewish community there, and there were 2 rabbis there. So I said, "We need a rabbi, we're getting married there." So we took the rabbi, paid for him for his transportation to bring him to Salgau. In Salgau, we go and get married. And the German town, it was a small town, they haven't seen a wedding like that in 50 years. So the whole town showed up when the wedding was, the ceremony. I still remember like today. And it was very nice. All of them bring cakes, pastries to the wedding.
What was the date?
Was I got married. We got married. The 29th of April, I think. Not April. Wait a minute. We got married in November. 29th of November. I get mixed up dates. It's so long ago. In November we got married, the 1st of November. And we left to the United States in December.
And so your brother came with you as well?
Yes. Came here to Richmond. We came to Richmond.
So it was your brother
And me only.
and your wife,
Yes.
and you came to New York.
Yes. The two sisters went to Canada. And from New York, he came to Richmond. He had to have a job here waiting for you. Because at that time you couldn't come without having a job here. So I had a job in Richmond as a tailor in Bergen-Belsen. I remember today. I arrived here on Thursday, and on Monday I was working already. So later on, a couple of years later, we were invited to Fort Lee to speak to the officers there. There were 400 officers in Fort Lee, and there were 3 generals. When I arrived there, they sent us transportation. They picked us up and took us back home, the military. So when we arrived there, the 3-star general interviewed me before I started speaking. He wanted to know my background, different things, and I told him everything. And then we went out, there was a big, like a theater. We went out on the stage, and there were 2 other generals sitting there, and all the 400 officers and soldiers. So the 3-star general introduced me to the soldiers. He said, he is a survivor, a Holocaust survivor. He came to the United States, to Richmond, Virginia, and Thursday afternoon, and on Monday he was working. And he's still working.
So, did your brother follow you to Richmond?
Yes, he was here. He was working in another place. Tolheimer's, he was working.
Okay. Was he also a tailor?
Yes. But he was married. What happened, he went to Canada to meet my wife's older sister. He met and brought her back to Richmond. And he got married here in Richmond.
And so they wound up settling here as well.
Yeah. And after I worked 3 months for Bergen-Belsen, I opened up my own store, my own shop, on Meadow Street. They, Bergen-Belsen, would send me work also. Even though I left them, they send me work and customers. So that's where I started.
And have you talked a lot about your experiences over the years?
Not much, but sometimes to a church, some churches.
Have you, did you ever find out what happened to the rest of your family?
Then none of us survived.
Did you find out what happened to them after they were taken?
The Auschwitz.
Where they went?
The Auschwitz. Most of them went to Chełmno, and the rest of them, when they were caught in eastern Poland, they took them to Treblinka or Auschwitz, one of the two.
And so your older brother was the only one from your family, the immediate family, that survived?
One brother.
Yeah.
He was not the oldest, second oldest.
Second oldest. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever find out what happened to the engineer?
No, I couldn't find him.
Yeah.
I went back, I was in Germany and I couldn't find him. I didn't know his name. I couldn't know where I knew he lived in Nordhausen, but I didn't know his name. You couldn't find him. I wish I could, because he was a nice person. See, not all Germans were Nazis. Not all Nazis are German.
Do you know approximately how many people actually survived from that camp?
But all of it?
No, just from Dora.
From Dora,
Yeah.
about 20,
20?
not more. And there were 35,000 prisoners there. There was still the war was still on when I was liberated in Bergen-Belsen. The war was still on for 2 more weeks because I was liberated April the 15th. And the war ended May the 8th.
Have you ever been back to Poland since you came to the United States?
Yes. One time I took my grandson with me. And we went to New York, from New York to Warsaw. From there we had a bus, a guide, a tour guide, took us around. I only wanted to go my hometown, nobody else. We went there, and he took us to the place where they killed the people. So the Germans and the Poles cleaned up most of it. So you couldn't tell what happened there. And I stayed there for a couple hours and went back. Didn't want to stay too long because people were scared. The driver, the tour guide had a gun with him.
What did your grandson think?
Huh?
What did your grandson think?
He was he was very moved, and it was shocking to him to see Auschwitz. We took him to Auschwitz from there, from Lodz, and we stayed there for about 3 days. I took him to Hamlo too, but he couldn't see anything. So we stayed there a couple hours and went back to Lodz. In Lodz, my wife worked there, see, at the time. In a delicatessen store. She worked in the food department, in the fruit department, fruit. So I went to buy some fruit. I still remember today, it's funny. I was buying apples. And I want to go back to my home, live not far from Lodz. So she put the nice apples on top, and on the bottom were rotten apples.
Now, you said you had a sister with you in the Lodz ghetto.
Yeah, we don't know anything what happened to her.
You don't know?
They killed her, took her to Auschwitz. My uncle too, and everybody.
And was that sister, just to clarify the timeline, did she leave your hometown with you to go to your aunt and uncle's house?
Don't remember. No, she was in this village there, was evacuated everybody.
Oh, okay, okay. And then you two just met up again in...
Yeah, in the village. And then later in Lodz.
Oh, okay, okay. Are there other experiences that you want to tell us about?
Well, when they made us wear the Star of David, the Germans. So I was working in the road. I took off my Star of David. With a safety pin was on. So they spotted, and I wanted to speak with the Poles, you know. So they spotted the guard. And he noticed I don't have the star on. So I told him, go put it on. He gave me 25 lashes on the behind with a whip. For 3 days I couldn't sit. That was I still remember today. There are a lot of things you don't remember everything.
So you were actually in Dora for only about 5 or 6 months.
Yes. I was in Częstochowa also. And then in Bergen-Belsen, where I was liberated.
Did you, when you were being transported from Dora to Bergen-Belsen?
Yes.
Did you stop anywhere in between?
No.
Okay. So it was basically they
Straight
took you
through.
directly there.
Yeah. And when we stopped in a small town called Bergen, the train stopped. It made us walk to the camp. It was about 2 miles there to walk. We started walking 9 o'clock. We arrived at the camp 3 in the afternoon. So when they arrived at the camp, they put us in the camp, and they were guarding us all around, still.
And do you remember how long it was before the British liberated the camp? How long were you there?
I was in Bergen-Belsen for 2 weeks.
2 weeks before the British came?
Yeah. But we didn't believe the Germans anything. When they say day, you think it's night. They lied all the time to everybody. The same thing with the liberation. The day we were liberated, before the day before, they says the Swiss Red Cross is going to take you over. The war was still on. Well, we didn't believe him at that time. So but anyway, we lined up. And there came the MP, military police.
Is there anything in
They
particular?
threw chocolate, cigarettes to the prisoners, the English.
Is there anything, any one thing you would like people to take away from your experiences?
Well, to tell them, I'll tell them one thing. Not all Germans were Nazis, and not all Nazis are German. Because of that German, I survived the war. Otherwise I wouldn't. And also was one Pole, like Caesar. He told me not to go. He also was part of my survival.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Huh?
Is there anything else you would like to share with us?
I think the main thing is when you live through this horrendous period, hatred is very destructive. Not to hate. Be nice to people. Help them if they need help. That was, I thought, my experience teach me that. There are also some good people. Not all of them are mean in Germany. There are many Germans who were not Nazis. I was safer after the war. I was safer in Germany than in Poland. Yeah, I stayed in Germany for 3-4 years before we came to the United States. We arrived here in 1949 in the United States. We came directly to Richmond. We came to New York. In New York we stayed only 2 hours. And by train went to Richmond. We arrived here, like I said, Thursday afternoon. And the Jewish organization which provided my contract to come here, the LHBA called, Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Association, they were instrumental for me to come here. So they assigned me to a family house here on Maplewood Avenue. I remember like today. We arrived in the house, my wife and I, with the one suitcase, that's all. We came to the house, and the old lady was about 80 years old. She lived there by herself in the house. And they rented the rooms from her, the organization. So when we opened that door, went into the house with my wife. She said, "Are you married?" "Yes, we are." "Can I see your marriage license?" I showed her the marriage license. She couldn't read it. It was written in Hebrew. There's all kinds of experiences.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else you'd like to add, we'll wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah, well.
We appreciate you talking to us.
Well. I don't talk very often. Very seldom. I made the recording for my children,
Yeah.
my life story. They had, each one of them had a tape. I made it at New York. Because when we were here, about 2-3 years, they came down from New York. And they want to record our life story. So that's what they did. Spielberg, he was sponsoring that whole project. So I got a letter from Spielberg. Thank me for letting him do my story.
Well, thanks for talking to us today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming. It's over.